All right. Thank you for your patience. As said earlier, this was a technical issue. And when dealing with technology, these things happen. So I would want us to actually trust that this was a technical issue and not some nefarious plan. I do understand the sentiment or some of the sentiments in the room, but as you see, this has been fixed now. So I hope we can continue and we can have a very interesting and fascinating panel, even though we are, of course, at the moment of crisis in Europe, globally, and globally as well. So I'm going to complete the introduction of our panelists, and thereafter, then I would invite the panelists to give their interventions based on questions I'm going to ask them. A last reminder, please, this is the last opportunity to use the link online, because soon we are going to be switching to our panelist who is joining us online. So I'll start again. Dr. Adnan Mahmutovic is a Bosnian-Swedish writer and professor of English literature. His academic work covers post-colonial studies, comic studies, and war literary studies. His novels, stories, and essays have mainly dealt with Bosnian rape victims and genocide survivors in Sweden, as well as resonances between Bosnian experiences and those of European Jews and Palestinians. Don Musa Panzu, who joined us, thank you for joining us, is the author of the book Yaya Naleki. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Co-reporter of Congo, Motherland, and Kangugu, among others, and an opinion writer with a strong focus on racism, discrimination, and decolonization. He is committed to fueling public debate on how Belgium deals with its colonial past. Professor Pieter Lagrou teaches contemporary history at the Université libre Bruxelles. He has published on the legacy of Nazi occupation, on the challenges of writing European contemporary history, and on the history of international law and justice. Among his recent publications, and I can promise you there are a lot of them, are a collective volume, Defeating Impunity, as well as attempts at international justice in Europe since 1914. So I'm going to ask the questions, the panelists, a first set of questions. The first question is all going to be the same, and you'd have 4 to 5 minutes to respond to this first question. Then I'll ask you a second round of questions, and you'd have an additional 4 to 5 minutes to respond to this. Then I would invite the audience to begin inputting their questions, and I would read these questions out to you, or at least to those of you that it's relevant and you can then answer. I would want to really please insist that please try to be as concise as possible with your responses, because we were working on a time schedule, and now we've had this technical setback, so we really also want to continue with the rest of the program at the end of the day. So the first question is to you, Rima Hassan. You have a master's degree in international law. And so what defines a genocide, and how does global power dynamics and racial hierarchies influence its classification and the subsequent international response?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I will speak French. I have a couple of minutes, and I'll try to address a number of points pertaining to the classification of a genocide, and specifically for the Palestinian case. I will start with the intentionality, which is the most crucial element. And this aspect has been characterized ever since the onset of the attack in Gaza. Then I will address the legal definition of genocide and the 5 criteria that allows you to characterize this crime within international law. Then I will wrap up on the 3rd and 4th points. What are the hindrances that we have to overcome specifically for the Palestinian case? And I will also address the failure of the international system and bring you some elements of context. As for the intentionality, this is the most important item with regard to the characterization of this crime. This intentionality allows you to distinguish war crimes and crimes against humanity. As for what is unfolding in Gaza, this is a crucial element. Even before we reached the level of casualties that we have seen today, more than 50,000 civilian deaths, we had this intentionality that should have raised the alarm, specifically when looking at what Israeli officials say, that what Israeli army personnel says. If you look at what Amnesty International or Human Rights reports, you can read hundreds of declarations from army officers, from Israeli officials that speak on behalf of this attack and that speak defending the actions of the Israeli government. So we have a history of many declarations documented by these organizations, and these declarations can support the intentionality, and you also have clear destructive intent. So you can look at the behavior of soldiers. We have so much records of this destructiveness that we had to create databases that could relay the actions of Israeli soldiers. So this is to show how much these are not done in isolation. This is a systematic approach of the Israeli army in Gaza. There is also repeated attacks perpetrated against civilians, against civilian buildings. And the instructions are to carpet bomb Gaza, and this is also found in declarations of representatives of the Israeli government. So this intentionality is at the very heart of the definition of genocide. And this element, again, is the one that allows you to properly frame the situation and what is imposed on Palestinians. Very early on, the Palestinian subject was animalized. But this is not something new. Their humanity is taken away from them. For decades, Palestinians have been compared to cockroaches that have to be crushed under rocks, as snakes, and there are many, many quotes from Israeli officials that deprive Palestinians of their humanity and compare them to animals, and this was highly mediatized, so they were also often qualified of human animals. So this is at the very heart of the definition of genocide. As for the 5 characteristics of a genocide, you have the murder of the members of a given group, deliberate murders, we're talking about civilians here, violations of the physical and mental well-being of the members of this group. So you could talk about the amputees, the injured, people with lifelong consequences because of the Israeli offensive. Thirdly, intentional submission to conditions of living that can bring about the partial or total destruction of the said group. So this was addressed by a lawyer called Gilles Devers, who passed away not long ago, and he really stressed that element. He said that the genocide currently ongoing in Gaza is a genocide via destruction of the social core. It's about ensuring that the group of Palestinians living in Gaza cannot live where they used to live. So it is attacks against the group and its own environment. The 4th criteria is the criteria of hindering births within the group. So the United Nations has documented abundantly this element, and it has referred to the destruction of every kind of healthcare system in Gaza. de facto hindering births within this group. And the fifth element is forced displacement, specifically of children. When you characterize a genocide, you do not need a cumulative aspect of these 5 criteria. You must only need to characterize one of these 5 criteria in order for you to be able to talk about a genocide. For the Palestinian case, we are talking about 4 out of 5 criteria that have been documented by a number of international organizations. If you look at a compilation of all the works produced over the past years, 4 out of 5 criteria for which there is a very clear understanding. So the 3 first criteria have been documented by ONGs, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and others. Recently, measures seeking to stymie births within the group have been documented by the United Nations. So this is for the definition. For the third element, international submission to conditions of living that can bring about the partial or total destruction of the group, you could add important figures. 80% of health institutions have been deliberately targeted and destroyed. 90% of the population was forced to move more than once. We're talking about 2 million people being displaced. And more than 80% of arable lands have been deliberately damaged. Currently, you have other NGOs working on the ecocide of the Gaza Strip. Indeed, agricultural lands belonging to Palestinians in Gaza were destroyed deliberately by the Israeli army. Third and fourth items that are linked: obstacles and prevention of genocide. What are the obstacles? Because we were confronted to a number of obstacles. So this is a colonial genocide. Here we can summon the concept of bringing a hierarchy to crimes within international law, and we can stress in that regard the colonial aspect of that genocide. This colonial intent breaks down the classification of international crimes. So this is one element, and the second element is that the Israeli state was built by communities that were also a victim of a genocide, the Holocaust and the Shoah, and this is something that further complicates the condemnation of the massacre in Gaza as a genocide. And what is often said is that when you accuse Israel of genocide, you are an anti-Semite. When you're saying that you condemn this as a genocide, you Nazify the Jewish communities that compose that state. But this is false, and this is a way for the Israeli government to instrumentalize the conflict. And I will wrap up by mentioning the genocide of the Herero and the Nomak perpetrated by Germans in Namibia. Do you know how long it took for international institutions to acknowledge this genocide? And this is the first genocide of the 20th century. If it was not acknowledged, it is because it was perpetrated within a colonial sphere, and it took 80 years for the international institutions to acknowledge the genocide. It was perpetrated in 1904 and was acknowledged in 1985. This first genocide of the 20th century was the first Nazi laboratory. It is in Namibia that Nazis carried out their first experiments. and that inspired, between quotes, the systematic Nazi approach deployed during this Second World War and before the Second World War. Where we failed is on the matter of prevention. The international community failed in terms of prevention, and Francesca Albanese addresses this often. Our role, the role of the international community, is to stop genocides from happening. It's not about waiting for a genocide to happen and then comment on its aftermath. Prevention of genocide is something that is not thoroughly dealt with by states. This convention is meant to commit states to prevent genocide. The ICG drafted an order and said that the Gaza population constituted a group and that the atrocities of the Israeli government could lead to a genocide if nothing was done. If the conservatory measures of the ICG were not carried out, well, we had all the items to understand that the genocide was being committed. But what we saw was that states did not do anything. We are on a continent where the European institutions are not acting on these obligations. So I will wrap up on this. Thank you very much.
Rima? Thank you. Thank you. In the interest of time, because you probably have to clap at the end of every intervention, in the interest of time, can we do this at the end? All right. Thank you. I would also invite Dr. Yoav Shemer to also reflect on this definition of genocide and the classification, as well as the role of power, of global power dynamics in what is recognized as a genocide and what is not recognized as a genocide. Thank you.
Sabah al-khair. Boker tov. And Ramadan Mubarak. Come on. Your question, Emmanuel, is more the question of the recognition of what is going on, of the possibility to nominate and to speak up against the genocide. And the power relations, indeed, here in Europe, in this political context where we are, in the European Union, the possibility to use the term genocide to define what is going on in Gaza since the 7th of October, 2023, following the Hamas attack. But I want to start my intervention by asking you here a question. Do you think that this panel today is anti-Semitic? Do you think that the speakers in this panel are anti-Semites? Do you think that what RIMA, HASSAN just said and explained is motivated by some hatred against Jews because they are Jews? If you ask the majority of European Jews living in Europe, they will say yes. A recent survey by the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, GPR, based in London, found that 61% of the Jewish population in Britain believes that the claim that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians is an anti-Semitic claim. 35% disagree. Why these numbers are important? Why do we care what the majority of European Jews think about the genocide in Palestine? Because the European Commission strategy against anti-Semitism is based on these numbers. The European Commission strategy to fight anti-Semitism is based on the perceptions of European Jews on what is anti-Semitism. It is based notably on the IHRA working definition on anti-Semitism, the famous International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition and its 11 examples. 7 of them are what we call Israel-related anti-Semitism. The IHRA was created as a tool by Israel and its allies across the world as a tool to silence us, to silence all of us. It's a tool of repression to silence the Palestinian narrative. Freedom of expression is a fundamental freedom in the European Union. Article 11 of the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. These are our freedoms here that are at stake. And we know where we are going if we don't do anything about it. We know very well what is the direction. Mahmoud Khalil, US student from Columbia University, holding a green card of the United States, was abducted and is still probably waiting a deportation while his wife is waiting to give birth to his first child. In Germany, what do we have in Germany? Silence, censorship, self-censorship, academics losing their jobs, artists losing their funding, and governments in Europe, all across Europe, are threatening non-governmental organizations like us to cut our funding if we dare to speak up against Israel in the name of the so-called fight against anti-Semitism. This is the direction we are going to all over Europe. It starts in Germany, and it continues in France. We have legislation now ongoing, and it's going on in the Netherlands, and everywhere. Europe is full of these attempts by Israel and its proxies across Europe to silence each and one of us. How can we change that? It's not too late to change that. In 2020, academics and specialists on genocide in Jerusalem, in the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem, created the JDA, the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, as a response, as an alternative to this propaganda tool, which is the IHRA. The JDA clarifies not only what is anti-Semitism, but more importantly for the discussions on freedom of expression, the JDA also clarifies what it is not. Opposing Zionism is not anti-Semitic. Opposing Israel's genocide in Palestine is not anti-Semitic. Opposing the Zionist apartheid regime in Palestine is not anti-Semitic. It is not anti-Semitic to demand full equality between all inhabitants, from the river to the sea. Finally, it is not anti-Semitic to demand the implementation of United Nations General Assembly Resolution of December 1948, resolution number 194, the right of return of the Palestinian refugees back to their homes from which they were expulsed by the Zionist military forces during the Nakba. Haq el-Aude. This is not anti-Semitic claim. This is international law. So if we care for our freedom of expression, if we still want to save this fundamental freedom in Europe before it is too late, we need to oppose the IHRA, wherever it is pushed upon us, and we can use, and I recommend and urge you to use this new tool, the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, the JDA, as a concrete step to oppose this oppression before it is too late. Do not let the Zionists define what is anti-Semitism. Zionist Jews do not represent all Jews. Okay, in a minute. So if I go back to the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, the JPR, because I go back to that research because actually the European Commission is referencing to that study quite often, so I will stop with that. They posed a question, they asked the question to the UK Jews, a sample of almost 5,000. They asked a simple question: do you consider yourself to be a Zionist? 65% answered yes. 65% self-identify as Zionists. However, 35% said no. 35% said they define themselves either as non-Zionist or anti-Zionist. Jews in Europe are not a monolith. European Jews are divided. European Jews have a large diversity of opinions on Israel and on Zionism. Zionist Jews do not represent all Jews. Thank you.
I understand I'm going to have to deal with a very difficult crowd this morning. So I just want to send, a gentle reminder again, can we please keep the clapping, the applause to the end. Professor Pieter Lagrou, you've written a lot on the Nazi occupation, on the Holocaust, on national memory and on remembrance. And so what can you also tell us about, especially in your work, the definition of genocide and how this relates to a lot of the work you've written around the reconstruction of national memory in, for instance, Belgium and the Netherlands?
Thank you. The 1948 Genocide Convention set itself two goals: to prevent and to punish. The first half-century has not been a success story. Several episodes of systematic mass killing that have been qualified as genocide have continued to occur. The signatories of the 1948 Convention have actively abstained to call them genocide while the killing was going on because of the obligation this entailed for them to intervene. This has been very well documented, especially in the case of Rwanda. Not a single individual has been sentenced found guilty of genocide before the trial of Paul Akayesu, as Emmanuel mentioned, in 1998. Minor local national trials have occurred. For instance, the sentences of Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu in 1990 for genocide and their instant killing, but they are probably not episodes we can draw inspiration from. Instead of being a tool for action, as Raphael Lemkin intended genocide to be, genocide became an exclusive category of retrospective analysis and even of commemoration. And I think we have to admit that this is an improper and probably even a perverse use of the category of genocide. Thus, a strange discourse developed of prevention, of genocide education, and of never again, coupled with the axioma of the unicity and incomparability of the Nazi genocide against the Jews. Now, if nothing ever matches historical precedent, there can only be minor crimes and there can be no prevention. Whatever the present brings us will never match the criteria that have been historically set if genocide is merely a retrospective category. Genocide as a historical label creates a binary understanding between an ironically, I insist, a honors league of mass crimes, those that qualify to be called a genocide, and then a mass of minor crimes of misdemeanors, no matter how many people have been killed or tortured, as long as it's not genocide, it probably doesn't really matter. It's not really bad. Now, does it really further our understanding of centuries of transatlantic slave trade and the millions of individuals that have been killed in the process if we call it or do not call it genocide? Does it alter our understanding of the criminal nature of the Congo Free State of Leopold II by calling it or by not calling it genocide? Even undeniably, what happened to the Armenians in 1915 was a genocide. But can we continue to write history with scissors, cutting out what happened to Christian minorities in Anatolia and never mentioning what happened to Muslim minorities in the Balkans and the Caucasus? Isn't historical understanding and historical dialogue about context? So several historians like Dirk Moses or legal scholars like Philip Sands have pleaded to decenter our obsession with genocide. I honestly do not think that the anti-racist struggle is helped by an exclusive recourse to the concept of genocide. If only genocides matter, we will never achieve a proper historical understanding, and we will deprive ourselves of the capacity to denounce structural racism, including in history writing. Now, what has happened since October 2023 in Gaza, the Israeli onslaught on the population of Gaza, is an entirely different matter. This has to do very literally with the aim and the scope of the 1948 Genocide Convention, to prevent and to punish. And so it is probably no coincidence that it is historians of the genocide, first of all my good friend Rasega, later joined by people like Omer Bartov, historians who are speaking out. If we hear the political leaders of the Israeli government speak an explicitly genocidal language, we have a duty and an obligation to speak out. So, as a historian, please, let's use the Genocide Convention for what it was intended for action, for prevention, and for punishment, and not as some overarching historical discourse awarding labels of the worst crimes in history. The Genocide Convention is about what is happening now. It is not a general historical discourse. Thank you.
I'm happy we can all have a collective laugh. But thank you very much, Professor Lagrou. And also thank you very much for being very concise as well. Jonathan, your work has been a lot with the Romani population. And if you can also contextualize as you try to define what genocide is, and of course also take into consideration some of the comments made by Professor Lagrou, how would you explain and classify what has happened to the Romani populations historically, but also contemporarily? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Emmanuel. As Emmanuel mentioned, I worked for the European Roma Rights Centre. We sue racist authorities for discrimination against Roma, the largest ethnic minority group in Europe. It's very hard. It's getting harder. If there's any would-be lawyers in the room, please go to school. We need more lawyers. We need more human rights activists. For Romani peoples, the concept of genocide has unfortunately become actually quite culturally prescient. It exists in the languages we speak, it's in our songs, it's in our sayings, it's even something we indirectly teach kids. It's this oral memory of Holocaust. Even for someone like me, so I grew up in Wales on the other side of the Channel, so unlike the vast majority of Roma people in Europe, no one in my family was murdered by the Nazis. But I still grew up hearing about lists of Roma names that the Nazis were going to put together ready for the invasion. There's this, this knowledge or this fear that Gaje society, so the non-Roma society, wanted to destroy us in some way. And I think this is something that all Romani people in Europe have to come to terms with in some way or another, usually as a child. Partly through this cultural memory, but also, unfortunately, through experience. Similar to what Pieter was saying, for Roma, the question of what defines a genocide is a current topic. The initial failure to define the mass murder of Roma during the Holocaust as a genocide, so that a deliberate attempt to annihilate in part or in full a person or a people, this failure has a huge impact on the Romani experience on this continent in the decades since. I would say that based on this history, that this sort of process of truth and reconciliation, or I mean for Roma, the lack thereof, following a genocide, this is what dictates the response and continued human rights situation of a group. So for Roma in Europe today, there are what I would describe as perhaps genocide adjacent practices that many Roma are all too familiar with. I'm talking about a history of forced sterilization of Romani women in countries like Sweden until 1971, in what's now Czech Republic and Slovakia, with the last known case being 2012. The ongoing and widespread crisis of child removals. This touches a little bit on what Rima was saying, that children are removed at an alarming rate from Romani families throughout history, not only, but across much of Central and Eastern Europe now. In some areas, up to 80% of the kids that we see in institutions are Roma. This isn't a coincidence. On top of this, you have what we call the securitization by states of Roma. So in countries particularly like Bulgaria, Hungary, Italy, here Roma have become a policy issue of security. So no longer like an assailed and marginalized minority. Now they are a danger to either be contained or removed. In Italy, under Berlusconi, first Berlusconi, his so-called nomad emergency brought about things like ethnic censuses, fingerprinting of children, stepping up the placement of Romani families in ethnically segregated government camps. More recently, Italy's former Interior Minister Matteo Salvini called for a mass cleansing of Roma, street by street, piazza by piazza, neighborhood by neighborhood. His call was taken literally, actually, by neo-fascist members of Casa Pound and Forza Nuova, who practically implemented pogroms based on this genocidal language. In Bulgaria, it goes a while, high-level politicians very recently used genocidal language with an alarming lack of consequences. So recently, former Deputy Prime Minister Krasimir Karakachanov in 2019 spoke of a need for a complete solution to the gypsy problem. Other politicians have called for labor camps for Romani criminals, incentives to encourage Romani women to be sterilized in order to reduce the Roma population in Bulgaria. Hungary, my last hit list for the countries. Here now you have a far-right fomenting hatred on the basis of so-called gypsy crime. Roma are presented as an existential threat from within, and within the 21st century we have had paramilitaries patrolling Roma neighborhoods, setting up checkpoints, and at the worst launching a wave of terror that included firebombing Romani homes and murdering whole families with automatic weapons as they fled from a burning house. I would say that these practices contain but effectively remove Romani populations. This is what genocidal intent looks like in a period outside of mass killings. For Roma, going back to this kind of folk memory of genocide, I know so many people for whom the next genocide is it's not something that's impossible or abstract, but something that's in the back of your mind. It's something you need to be prepared for in some way. My father is visiting at the moment, me in Brussels, I live here. And for him, this is something that comes up surprisingly regularly in conversation. And I think for me, this is the original sin, if you can call it that, was never properly dealt with. And precisely because the genocide was not defined for Roma, it allows these kind of genocide-adjacent activities to continue into the present day, long after the camps were liberated. Thank you.
I used to teach, and this reminds me sometimes of a classroom. So thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Dr. Adnan Mahmutovic, I would like to shake this up a little bit, moving slightly but not completely away from the definitions. So if you can also incorporate in your definition or how you define as an expert what genocide is, also how international bodies contribute to the erasure of genocides and what measures, for instance, can be taken to stop these practices. A case in point, for instance, the genocide in Bosnia, which European authorities and politicians often conveniently leave out when addressing their own contemporary history. And in fact, recently, when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the European Commission and politicians in their condemnations often refer to this as the worst attack on European soil in the last 70 years, ignoring the horrific Bosnian genocide which took place just 30 years ago. So within this context, how would you be able to define genocide? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. During the war in Bosnia, I always wondered, what it would feel like to be on this side in a hall like this, not watching from that position, but from another position, wondering like, what is the world, where is the world and who speaks for whom? So I'll start with the definition briefly, because I think, as others have said, genocide was clearly defined by Lemkin. It's there in the Geneva Convention. It's so clearly recognizable, I think, for at least those of us who have lived through something like that. But in my view, much polemics regarding the definitions quotes with genocide denial. One thing I feel is missing from Gregory Stanton's excellent work on 10 stages of genocide is genocide denial. Some have argued that it is the 11th stage. But in my view, genocide denial is not just something that comes after the fact. I think it's something that follows through the entire process from the beginning, from the planning of the murders, rape, starvation, all those things until the end, right? And this industry of genocide denial that all of us have faced, I feel it testifies a great deal to the notion of intention, which was mentioned. Because I think people squabble a lot about this intention, whether it's intentional or not, and how to prove something like that. I think it's a mistake to think that it should be like a public proclamation, a manifesto, or something. Yes, there is a lot of evidence, as was mentioned before, but I think its intention is shown through action. And to give you an example, just as denial is not just like saying, oh, it didn't happen, or it should be classified as something else. I think, just to give an example from Bosnia, these mass graves, right? I mean, that needed to be organized, right? That they need to be, you needed to have the right equipment, the men to operate the bulldozers. Those things don't just lie around. And those mass graves were there to cover the crimes. Right? Now we have these places like Koričanske stijene, where like a big, it's a mountain. No one hikes there, right? You throw people off the cliff. Okay, that's not enough. You come later with acid to disintegrate the bodies. That's denial. You move mass graves. I mean, that's quite a phenomenon. Moving mass graves, that is quite an undertaking. So I think that what's missing from the current discourse is a stronger emphasis of this ongoing denial, and I think it's a weird thing. I call this Schrödinger's genocide. So it's like in the Schrodinger's experiment, something is, both is and it's not, right? So these people committing genocide, they are also, they want to take pride in it, because of the great work that they think they're doing at the same time as they are denying it. So it's like this two-state thing that is simultaneously like in the discourse, which I think is they want to have their cake and eat it, basically. I think global powers are engaged in genocide denial as well, especially during the process in order for not to act. What the professor said, the whole point with Lemkin's excellent research was to prevent. We recognize these things, we act, right? So that gives them space not to react in the only ethical way as possible. That is correct, and that also for me signals culpability and support. That's just the level of discourse. I'm not even talking about equipment, weaponry, technology, those kinds of things. The other question was about what happened when Ukraine came up. And make no mistakes, Bosnians felt for the Ukrainians and the Palestinians. I think what you mentioned, it rippled through Bosnian bodies all over the world. It was this, thing we thought that we forget them, but it came, it just comes out of our bodies. It was interesting to notice, of course, how very few reacted to that. Like, oh yeah, Ukraine, first thing like in Europe after some. Oh, well, how convenient, like at all levels of society. Okay, I understand younger people maybe haven't, studied, but, seriously. So there is this blissful ignorance of the inconvenient war in the 90s, and in a sense, like ongoing, how to say it, not only is there no sense of guilt, right? But, there is not even a pride in helping refugees. You would at least expect some of these countries to say, oh, but we at least helped a lot of these refugees. There's not even that. You should boast about it, at least something. You've done something good, right? I get a sense that Europe wants to think of it like it happened on another continent. Yes, Bosnian genocide is historically recognized. We had the UN resolution last year, but it's not something that just came out of nowhere. Just as Jews had to fight a lot to get the Holocaust into the history books and as an integral part of European history, we had to fight as well. So it took quite a while. Rape was recognized as war crime thanks to Bosnian women. It's a handful of feisty women who fought tooth and nail to get things done in places like these, right? They established that, right? So when we talk about, what can we do? I can get a little pessimistic, because there is a crackdown on all kinds of institutions, on people personally, so at all levels, really. And that tends to be really discouraging, I would say. If you can crack down on ICJ, I mean, who am I? Right? It's insane to see European countries going against, some of the things said by the ICJ, to ignore those kinds of institutions. What does it signal to the Republika Srpska, the Serb leaders right now in Bosnia who are, ethnically cleansed, where I come from, who are seeking secession, splitting the country effectively right now as we speak, maybe there will be another war, we don't know. So you see what I mean with this. And even though, So I think we owe it to those people on whose shoulders we stand, those people who have built these kinds of things, what they managed to accomplish. Hassan Mohanovic managed to, sue the Netherlands and win, right? That's quite an accomplishment. It's not like, he didn't have a country behind him. Right? We owe it to them to to fight tooth and nail for these institutions, like especially right now ICC and ICJ. With time, I became more kind of a believer in institutions because I feel they're more resilient. There's more power in them. You know, right now I also represent the Bosnian Association, National Association of Bosnians in Sweden. That gives me a little bit more weight in certain places. You know, so I think that's really important. And at the same time, you know, as a writer and as an educator, as a teacher, you know, I still put some trust in this fragile thing called the arts and education. I think it's hard, but to give an example, you know, Elon Musk came out with this, you know, the bug of Western civilization is empathy. I mean, come on, what, you know, where? And he's like, we need to dodge empathy. I mean, from the world. I mean, God, that's ridiculous. And you know, as someone who has dealt with empathy my entire life, I think that's the core of writing and education. Where else will you get that? Right? Where else will you teach empathy and engage empathically with people, meet people like this? I mean, I look at this room, all kinds of people, right? I love it. You know, it's just this beautiful sight in front of me. So forgive me for taking this lengthy answer to combine these. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you again, Dr. Adnan, and also for really putting this into context. Before I invite our next speaker, Don Musa, I would want to apologize for saying earlier that I was in a classroom. I know that was very offensive, and so please forgive me for saying that. Thank you. Don Musa, please.
Ja, ik kan het in het Nederlands doen.
I'll do it in...
Op te zetten, want we zijn hier in de minderheid vandaag. Goedendag iedereen, bonjour.
Hi everyone. Malaikum shalom, bote. I could speak many languages to say hi to you. I find it interesting. It is interesting. Is this better? I'll speak in the mic. Is this better? This is very interesting. You know, a lot of things have already been mentioned and covered. Thank you very much for to the other speakers to cover a couple of very important concepts this morning. A lot has been said about genocide already. It has been worded in beautiful words what genocide is all about. And currently, we are living in a kind of bubble. When I was traveling to this point, you should know I work as a youth worker mainly. Right? I work in the communities of Antwerp, Brussels, Charleroi, and I work with people who are not familiar at all with what genocide is all about. For us, it is clear, but I think, you know, to bridge that gap, to translate that, as it were, is the main challenge here. I'm sure that that is the major challenge for us, for you, and in our streets, because, dear people, this is what we're talking about. You can define very nicely what genocide is all about. There are studies, you know, we have expert people around who can do that for us. But, you know, for people to realize what that means, to know what this is all about, that is a gap we need to bridge. So the people, a couple of people know that I'm a Muslim. I'm a Muslim Congolese. That might sound strange, but it's part of my identity. We all have this identity, which consists of different things. Oh, well, you could talk about gender subjects. It's part of your identity. When you talk about Palestine, it breaks my heart what is happening there. And we could talk about the Congo equally. What it does to me is heartbreaking. And just like everyone attending here, I try to find peace and calm and someone to listen to us and find allies. On top of that, I'm looking for peers. I'm looking for people who have experienced the same, who have seen the same things. This is something we are all confronted with. We need to find people that we can relate to. When we talk about the Palestine situation, we need to talk about that from eye to eye, and the same applies to the Congo and to Goma, for example, when we talk about Goma. Now, today I'd like to talk about the streets. Yesterday I was in a youth centre, and apparently there are Congolese youth who are willing to travel to the east of Congo to go and fight. And they have a lot of worries. And when I was talking to them, they said, why is the international community lacking? Why are they not doing anything? There is a genocide there, isn't there? And I said, yes. However, you should know I also guide colonial walks. You should know the seaside town of Ostend has a very strong colonial past, and there I was guiding people, and I said there is a genocide going on in Congo, and a lot of people said that is not a genocide in the Congo. You can't say that. That's not a genocide, is it? And because people don't know the criteria. You know, we were talking about the Palestine question. 4 of 5 criteria are fulfilled there. Now, if you recognize even only one criterion, you can talk about a genocide. People do not know that, you see. To people today, we would have been celebrating the 100th birthday or anniversary of Patrice Lumumba. Now, Patrice Lumumba, he said at the time something really beautiful. If you don't mind, I'll quote him here. We have seen that the law was not equal depending on your skin color. That's what he said. Obviously, that's what he said at the time. He was hoping that that would change. And today I can say, well, things have not been solved, have yet to be solved. In the area where I work, amongst the youngsters, you know, there's a kind of hierarchy, you know, depending on what group you are talking about. You know, when it's about Palestine, you know, everyone talks about genocide. But what about the Congo? Even within the panel here, it's really nice to talk about this so that people realize what we're talking about. Even here, I'm the last to speak. And even after covering all of the intellectual frameworks, I have to provide my opinion. Everything has been said, basically. So I can only add what is happening in Congo. So this is an urgency. When you are part of a community that is threatened by genocide, you need to live in the now, and there shouldn't be any hierarchy of genocides. And this is something that we should all realize. And however, the applause that is echoing within these walls should be heard elsewhere. In Kinshasa, in the east of Congo, where we are fearing that a third African international war will start. When I was 12, I was living that, and things have not really changed, because we're back to where we started. You know, the genocide in Rwanda, for example. If you talk about the genocide there, a lot of people equally say, I'm not sure that was a genocide. Dear people, we need the right language, not only out there, but also within our institutions and amongst the people, so that people understand that this is genocide, so that we can create acknowledgement and empathy. So I haven't received a lot of time, if I look at my clock. Maybe we should have started with a minute of silence. Did we start with a minute of silence for all of the victims of genocide? And it was said, yes, let's keep the applause for at the end. Have we applauded for all of the heroes who are letting themselves heard, their voices heard, to stand up for the victims of genocide? I will round off here. Thank you very much. So that is what I wanted to say. I hope it was contributive to the cause of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Don Musa, and you're absolutely right that we should have begun with a minute of silence for all the victims of genocide, and of course, an applause for all the heroes. And I think that at the end of the session, we will do so. And thank you for calling us to action. Our next speaker is joining us online. This is Ms. Francesca Albanese. I got it right this time. She's UN Special Rapporteur, and she will be joining us in a few. Is she? Oh, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Albanese, for joining us this morning. So, you've listened to all of the other speakers, try to define genocide and also contextualize it based on the experiences of the communities that they represent, but also collectively. And as UN Special Rapporteur, and also based on your experience and the work that you currently conduct in the occupied Palestinian territory, how would you define genocide, and also how can you contextualize? Is Ms. Albanese there? Oh. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Sorry. Ms. Albanese, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Yes. So just to apologize for some technical reason, we can no longer see you on the screen.
Get off.
All right, but we can hear you very clearly. So how would you define genocide, and how would you classify or also include global power relations in the classification and the understanding of what a genocide is? Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Can you confirm that you hear my voice?
Yes, I can confirm you.
And I understand that you can't see me, and I see you in the dark, which is a nice metaphor of where we are right now. But there will be light.
Miss Albanese?
Yes.
Could you please give us a minute, because apparently those online are unable to get the interpretation services unless you're seen online. Really sorry for this.
This is the most interesting panel I have attended in months, so I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you very much.
No, and if I can say something, when you said, I'm sorry you had to apologize for saying that you felt like being in a classroom, because I took it as a compliment, because I feel in a classroom too, in the sense there are no dead bodies. Like, this is the impression I always feel when I come to the European Parliament. Do not take offense, why there seems to be living bodies in the audience for once, but also it looks like a classroom. This is what I understood, because I'm learning so much, and I guess this is what you meant. So I didn't take it as an offense.
Thank you. That's a lifesaver. Thank you.
Sometimes I'm kind,
yes.
You know.
But Ms. Albanese, please just give us one more minute to try to sort this out, and then you can continue. Oh, okay. I just got the go-ahead from the technical team that you can go. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Let's see at what point we will get the light. But let me also, because this is I think I understand I'm the last one to speak. I have 5 minutes, more or less, 5, 6. I want to start by thanking you, Dr. Achiri, for putting together such a brilliant panel. I want to thank each and every speaker who took the floor before me. I have one regret only, that the interpretation doesn't work, and I couldn't understand a word other than Lumumba that in the last presentation. But there is really so much that I would like to comment on. So let me start. Probably my journey is very interesting, and I hope that there are some officials listening to this, and some European officials who still need to be persuaded that this is a genocide. As a UN Special Rapporteur, my work is to document and report on the violations that take place in the occupied Palestinian territory, impartially, independently. So what I do as a lawyer, I look at the facts and I make a legal assessment. And it took me weeks. I mean, my other colleagues, special rapporteurs on various themes, since the beginning, since the 9th of October, have been saying, oh my God, this is going to be a genocide. We need to raise the alarm because the first obligation of the Genocide Convention is to prevent. I was the one holding back. And I have no shame at admitting this, because not just because of ignorance of what the Genocide Convention says, because I knew what the Genocide Convention says. It's how it's understood and perceived. So what I would call philosophically the Overton window, the words and the concepts that are politically acceptable, politically palatable, and then I thought genocide is out of the question here, because of course there will be war crimes and crimes against humanity. And this is where some colleagues who clearly admire me, but were also shocked by my mental resistance, told me, well, can you read the Genocide Convention and read where it comes from? If one of all, read Raphael Lemkin. And this is where my journey started. And if I've been there, now I was the first one to write a report that is part of the UN literature on genocide. And since then, I've written another report on genocide, in the first one, describing the first 5 months of the brutal assault that Israel had carried out against the Palestinians in Gaza. I will not comment again on what constitutes genocide, because Honorable RIMA HASSAN has already done it. But I would like to say that the acts of killing and creation of conditions of life calculated to destroy, and the infliction of harm, psychological and physical harm, it's something that was already happening in Palestine. So it's not something new. It's the intent to destroy, which is the intent, the determination, not the reason why, not the thoughts. It's why someone or why a state reaches the determination to destroy a people, a group in total or in part. And after October 9th, 2023, it became impossible not to see the direct intent. It became impossible not to see the policy. There is no debate about that, because they have said that they would destroy the Palestinians, calling, of course, the way they call them, but they have said it so many times. And over 16 months. So not only that Anatomy of Genocide captured what Israel had done, and it said, this is an X-ray, this is genocide. But also it said, watch out, because Israel is committing what I called back then humanitarian camouflage. It's not denying to have killed back then 30,000 people, 70% of whom were women and children, and devastated almost half of Gaza back then. It's justifying it as in compliance with international law. It's justifying it as eradicating Hamas, whatever it means, or fighting terrorism, or making people safe by giving them evacuation order, or moving them, the Palestinians in Gaza, into safe zones. This humanitarian language has been used for what I call humanitarian camouflage, justifying acts that are genocidal in order to distract from the intent. And in the second report that I wrote, the genocide as colonial erasure, I took yet another step back and I looked at why Israel is doing what it's doing. Because genocide is not necessarily an end in itself. It can be a means to an end. And the end is the erasure of the Palestinian people from the little that remains of their land, which the Palestinians have committed to through an historical compromise, to recognize as the only place where they will exercise the right of self-determination, which is not the right to have a state. No, this is a Western concept. And please, it's 2025, we can understand that the majority of the world doesn't think only through our categories, and the concept of self-determination is to be interpreted through also like the very concept of indigenous people. And the concept of self-determination, as it's been codified as a universal right, is the right to exist as a people, which means either in a form of state or in other forms, but not to be erased and to be respected, so as the people determining itself politically, culturally, and economically. This is what Israel is after, and it has said it, and we see that. So what I said in that report said, this is part of a colonial erasure. It's happening in Gaza, but it's also happening with different methods, but reaching the same goals in the West Bank. And I analyzed in particular already in October last year, the destruction of health facilities, the number of people killed, 600 people killed in 11 months, in 12 months, from October 23 to October 2024. And now that number has surpassed 900. In the West Bank alone, 900 Palestinians have been killed since October 7, 2023, including nearly 200 children. So we have 18,000 children killed in Gaza, which doesn't take into account the 400 who were killed in one night, the other night, and 200 in the last, in the West Bank. So the genocide is leaking out. It's not, and again, I would like to invite you not to talk about Gaza as if it was a standalone entity or the West Bank. This is what remains of Palestine. These are the Bantustan, where Palestinians have been segregated, where they've been arbitrarily arrested and detained, persecuted, and this is the thing, and this is, I'm inspired. I've never said this thing, but I'm inspired by what I heard from Professor Lagrou in particular, and also Professor Mahmutovic. The precursor of the crime of genocide were totally identifiable in the context of Palestine, but they have been normalized, including by the institutions like the European Union, because the crimes that the Palestinians have been endured over the past 57 years alone in the occupied Palestinian territory, without considering what has happened to the entire Palestinian people since the British colonization, because this is where the problem really originated. However, it's been the normalization of the crimes that they were enduring. No one has challenged Israel for its unlawful occupation, even now that we have an advisory opinion which stipulates that the occupation is unlawful. It is to be dismantled totally and unconditionally. Israel needs to withdraw the troops, dismantle the settlements, stop exploiting Palestinian resources, water, land, controlling borders, controlling airspace, etc. These are the obligations that Israel has. So what are member states doing in the face of this? Nothing. And also they're not intervening on the ICC arrest warrants more robustly, because they should be, what I mean by robustly, there should be complementarity. Every Israeli soldier who might have partaken in the operations in Gaza, in the West Bank, is to be considered prima facie under investigation. There should be a vetting over the Israelis as they transit to other countries, because everyone goes through the military system. And this is not to say, I don't want to say that all Israelis are responsible, because in fact I'm the one who calls for inclusiveness and say we should not invisibilize the Israelis who are co-resisting with the Palestinians, the genocide, the occupation, and the apartheid. But Yoav, before us, as mentioned, what are the statistics, where the population stands. And again, I will go back to the Overton window. We need to move the discussion from the suffocating space where it is right now and continue to analyze it against international law, which is the element, the normative framework that allows us to distinguish what is prohibited from what is not. For example, and this is why this genocide not only could not be prevented, but we continue to fail to stop it, because even now, in the face of the last massacre, 400 people killed, 600 people injured, 200 children killed. There are doctors who struggle to understand the gender of the babies because they've been, there are only parts of the bodies left. And the US ambassador just told the Security Council that Israel had the legitimate right to intervene because it had to target, it was targeting Hamas terrorists. So, you know, this language is not new. This is why we need to take this moment as an opportunity to recognize the colonial legacy of our lands, not just the system, the international legal system. Is not the problem today is not with the laws. The problem is that with the law enforcement mechanism, which continue to fail over and over, because fundamentally we are still a bit racist. And I'm not pointing fingers to anyone, but I say in Europe we really struggle to see human beings outside our circle as equal. And this is why I was so happy to sleep only 3 hours tonight, to take an early plane, an early flight, and be with you today. I would like to make one last comment, and then I will return the floor to the moderator. And I don't think that it's necessarily a situation of blissful ignorance what we are facing in terms of responses from the political elite. I think that this willful blindness is something that allows them to think that they can continue with the impunity, not only of Israel. Because I think that to an extent, there will be a moment where we will realize that the Israelis have somewhat been. And again, I say that with a lot of respect, and I understand if the Palestinians in the room might not appreciate what I'm saying, but I think that the Israelis in general have been also victimized in this situation because they have been indoctrinated by a racist ideology that has turned into political doctrine. But I wonder how much of the suffering that has been inflicted on the Jewish people has not contributed to this. Because when I hear Ben, I should address you by family name, but I cannot see the screen now. So I hear Ben talking of the Romani people, and I hope that you have heard me saying, whenever I refer to the Nazi fascist genocide, I say the genocide of the Jews, the Roma and Sinti, the people with disability, and anyone who didn't conform with the idea and the politics of the pure race, which unfortunately has not disappeared from our political veins in Europe. But again, I think that it's very important to remind ourselves that in a way, the Holocaust, it took years to write the Holocaust in the pages of history, but it took somewhat the state of Israel to give this sense of presence in the international arena to the Jewish people. And this is a fact that we cannot take out of the equation. We need to move beyond this. We need to move beyond the politics of identity, because they are very violent, and there is no way to live together in peace and security from now on. Maybe this is the lesson to learn, other than really living in solidarity, where solidarity is the political declination of love. And on this note, how beautiful that a lawyer talks about love instead of sterile international conventions. So back to you, Dr. Achiri, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you again, Ms. Albanese. So rather than asking the panelists a second question, I'm going to be reading some of the questions that we've received online. I understand we have about 15 to 20 more minutes for this session. I would like to invite the panelists to maybe try to keep your responses as brief as possible, so we can take as many questions as we can. And the first two questions are to Ms. Albanese. So can we please have her back on the screen?
Can you?
Yes, we can hear you. So in the meantime, I'll read the questions. So the first question is, the former UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Ms. Alice Nderitu, refused to call what is happening in Gaza a genocide because she believed what is happening in Gaza does not meet Raphael Lemkin's definition of genocide. She was subsequently dismissed from her role. How is it then possible that such drastically different conclusions are reached by UN officials, and why don't we follow the direction of the UN's genocide expert? And the second question is, how can we push for greater international accountability for perpetrators of genocide, and how can anti-racist movements and activists like ENAR contribute, in this case, the European Network Against Racism, contribute to advocacy around genocide recognition and punishment? Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Look, there is no, I think infallibility is a myth. It doesn't exist. We are human beings, so we can have different ideas, different interpretations of the law. So the reason why I reached the conclusion that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israel had committed acts of genocide it was not even Lemkin had opened my mind about the fact that genocide is a process, and it happens when there is the dehumanization of the other. The other is not seen as a human, and therefore this prompts the majority of the people not to intervene, which is also what, for example, Primo Levi describes about his own experience as a survivor of the Holocaust. He survived the concentration camps, but he couldn't survive the racism and sense of alienation that he encountered. As he exited the camps, and he returned to the social ordinary life. So why am I saying that? I don't want to comment on the conclusions of the genocide experts, of the special representative on genocide. Simply because I do not know her reasons. She didn't, we are not judges, but we make an assumption. We make not an assumption, but we deliver an opinion, a legal opinion, based on the facts. So the facts that I refer to are clear and can be contested or not, but disputed or not, but there should be a discussion about that. And so my legal analysis is clear. So this is the basis on which someone could agree or disagree with me. I do not have these elements because the expert in question has simply concluded, has expressed an opinion, not a legal analysis. She has not said why she thinks that this is not genocide. Also, again, according to the Genocide Convention. But I would say, meanwhile, I've been joined not only by 30 independent experts who are law professors in their domain, and since mid-October we have raised the alarm on the risk of genocide toward the end of October, and 1 week later, serious risk of genocide. And then as of mid-November, we have said there is a genocide unfolding, which then in March 2024, I documented. And since then, of course, there was the South Africa versus Israel proceeding before the ICJ. There is the Nicaragua versus Germany at the ICJ. There are 2 reports by the United Nations, the Special Committee on Israeli Practices, and now the Commission of Inquiry. Amnesty International has produced a phenomenal report. Forensic Architecture has provided the maps describing the cartography of this genocide. Israeli genocide scholars and others have concluded the same. Lee Mordechai is an Israeli professor who's very rarely mentioned, but I think he's the one who deserve the most credit, together with Professor Raz Sigal, who's the first who said this is a textbook case of genocide, because he's put together a database to document it. So, excuse me, and people can also change their mind. There's still time for the representative, even in a personal capacity, to say, I'm sorry, because making mistakes is human, persevering is evil. And what the anti-racist movement can do? A lot. And this is the point. This time in history can be revolutionary, and I believe so. This is the only hope I have. And hope is a discipline. It's not sitting and waiting for divine providence to make things happen. But the knowledge we have, a panel like this, correct me if I'm wrong, but would have not been possible 5 or 10 years ago. And the fact that we are talking of Palestine together with the genocide of the Palestinians, together with the genocide of, we are referring to the genocide of the Armenian, the Roma and Sinti, the genocide in Bosnia, and what has happened throughout colonialism. And again, I couldn't hear the presentation about Congo, but I say what Palestine is bringing in terms of legal developments, like it was the case that Professor Mahmutovic evoked. It's often through the suffering of people that international law catches up and developed. So we had the Genocide Convention after the genocide of the Jewish people, and the Roma and Sinti and others. And so now rape is considered a war crime after Bosnia-Herzegovina and Rwanda. And my determination, and this is what I will continue to work with a commitment I have, that this is the last genocide of human history, because this is the first time that we are understanding what a settler colonial genocide is. And when the International Court of Justice says, sorry, I know it's a bit long, but when the International Court of Justice says that the occupation is to end because it frustrates the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, and also the private sector must be responsible, my first thought goes to Congo, which is an independent country and still completely transfigured by the vulturism of multinationals. So colonialism can still be identified there in various forms. So anti-racist movements have to unite, those fighting against racism toward indigenous people or religious groups and anyone. Either we unite and stand together, or we will have missed an opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Albanese. So we don't have much time left, and unfortunately there is another event starting at noon. Despite the technical issues, there is really nothing that we could do, and the other team had already booked this room for 12. So what I will do in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to read all of the questions that are available to the speakers, and if you can respond to this in 1 minute with your last thought. I know it's not the best scenario, but if you could please do that as quickly as possible. So to Professor Lagrou.
Maybe we can take the time to do the minute of silence and the clapping for the heroes of the genocide.
Okay, if that's the will of the audience, then let's do that. So can we please take a minute of silence for all of the victims of the genocide? And after this, we'd also give a round of applause for all those who are working to stop and punish genocide and all the heroes out there. Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. Can we please now give a round of applause for everyone? All right, thank you. I do understand that, I mean, there were so many interesting questions, and we would like the chance to be able to respond to those questions, but unfortunately, there's no time. So at least what we can do is we have collected all of the questions. We would ask the speakers to provide us maybe responses to these questions, and then we would share this with you. I hope that is okay. All right, thank you. Just before we leave, can we give a very big round of applause to yourselves first? And also, please, much louder, please, for yourselves. And also to our distinguished panelists for sharing with us your thoughts. And last but not least, to Ms. Francesca Albanese, who slept 3 hours just to make it with us this morning. Please a round of applause as well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, before we exit the room, I would like to invite the Executive Director of ENAR, Mr. Kim, to give us, or to make some technical announcements. Thank you.
She didn't look like she slept 3 hours.
Yeah.
All right, as everybody has heard, we have to vacate the room right away. This is the complicated part where I invite you to take a scenic detour of the European Parliament so that you can discover all of the amazing hidden corridors that this place has. You have received, all of you, a group letter for the next part of the session. At the session, this is important, coffee will be served at the session, but as you have seen, we have a late lunch. We've arranged for some biscuits that you can take on the way out, so please do take them, and then you will have lunch afterwards. I would like now to invite those of you who are in Group A, please stand up, and you may now vacate the room. All the other groups, please stay here. This is a bit like an airplane. So I just want Group A. Group A.
Professor Lagrou, could you please come for a group picture?
Those who are in Group A. I've lost them.
Yeah, yes,